The cruelest fate is not losing everything, it is waking up just in time to lose it all again. The snow had stopped falling by the time Isla Hartwell sank to her knees, her trembling hands reaching toward the tiny woven blanket lying forgotten beside the frozen riverbank. It was empty. Just moments before, her twin pups had been wrapped inside it, their soft cries filling the cold morning air with life. Now only silence remained, stretching across the white landscape like an endless winter. She searched desperately for footprints, for broken branches, for anything that might tell her where they had gone, but the wind had already erased every trace. Her heart refused to believe what her eyes could see. They were gone. Somewhere beyond the trees, horses disappeared into the distance, carrying away the two children she had spent every heartbeat protecting. Tears blurred her vision as she whispered their names into the freezing air, praying the forest itself might carry her voice to them. She tried to stand, but exhaustion weighed heavier than the snow upon her shoulders. Every promise she had made, every sacrifice, every lonely night hiding from a kingdom that would never understand, it had all ended here. She closed her eyes and held the tiny blanket against her chest. If only she had run sooner. If only she had never trusted the wrong people. If only she had never believed the Alpha King would someday discover the truth before it was too late. A deep ache settled inside her, not from anger but from regret too heavy to carry any longer. The world slowly faded until even the cold disappeared. Then, without warning, warmth brushed across her skin. Birds sang overhead. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains instead of bare branches. Isla's eyes flew open. She was lying in the small cottage where she had hidden months before the terrible day she had lost everything. Her breathing became uneven as she looked wildly around the room. Two tiny cradles stood beside the fireplace. Inside them, her newborn twins slept peacefully, wrapped in soft blue blankets, their tiny fingers curled into peaceful fists. For a long moment she simply stared, unable to move, unable to breathe. Then memories crashed through her mind all at once. The river. The empty blanket. The unbearable silence. The ending she had believed was forever. She rushed to the cradles and gathered both babies into her arms, holding them so carefully that she feared even the slightest movement might break the miracle before her. Warm little hands rested against her cheeks. Gentle breaths brushed her neck. They were alive. They were truly alive. A quiet sob escaped before she buried her face against their soft hair. Outside, the distant bell from the village chapel rang 3 times. Isla froze. She knew that sound. In her first life, those bells had marked the morning when a traveling merchant arrived asking for shelter. By sunset he had secretly delivered word of her hiding place to the royal court. 2 days later strangers had taken her children while she searched for medicine in the woods. Every terrible memory returned with perfect clarity. This was not another chance born from luck. It was a warning. She looked toward the window where golden sunlight spilled across the floorboards exactly as it had before. Every detail matched. Every second mattered. There was no time to question impossible miracles. She had already learned what hesitation would cost. Carefully placing the twins into a sturdy travel sling across her chest, Isla packed only what she could carry: a water skin, dried bread, a wool blanket, a small pouch of herbs, and the silver moon pendant her mother had once told her never to abandon. Her hands shook, but her movements never stopped. She left behind nearly everything else. Memories whispered that the Alpha King had never known the children existed until it was far too late, but this time she refused to wait for fate to decide their future. She stepped outside just as the distant sound of wagon wheels echoed along the road leading toward the village. Without looking back, Isla disappeared into the towering pines, choosing a narrow trail she had ignored in her previous life. Above the trees, unseen by her, a lone raven lifted into the bright morning sky and turned toward the royal capital, carrying with it the first silent sign that destiny had already begun to change. The forest welcomed Isla with the same quiet beauty it had offered in her first life, yet every familiar tree now carried the weight of a warning instead of comfort. She adjusted the sling holding her sleeping twins and continued along the narrow trail that wound between towering pines, refusing to glance toward the distant village road. Last time she had trusted familiar faces because she believed kindness would protect her. Now she understood that even gentle smiles could hide dangerous secrets. The twins remained peacefully asleep despite the steady rhythm of her footsteps, their tiny breaths warming her through the thick wool blanket wrapped around them. She whispered a silent promise that no matter how uncertain the road ahead became, she would never allow them to disappear from her arms again. By late afternoon the sunlight stretched long across the forest floor, painting golden patterns between the trees. Isla paused beside a crystal-clear stream to refill her water skin. She carefully drank only a few mouthfuls before washing her face, remembering that every supply mattered now. In her previous life she had continued north toward the old mill, where a traveling merchant had offered food and shelter. That decision had sealed her fate. This time she turned west instead, following a forgotten hunter's trail that few people even remembered existed. Every step away from the old path felt like rewriting a page of destiny with trembling hands. As evening approached, the twins stirred for the first time. One tiny cry quickly awakened the other, and Isla smiled through tears as she gently rocked them beneath the shelter of an ancient oak tree. Their small fingers wrapped around hers with complete trust, reminding her why fear would never again be allowed to guide her choices. She quietly sang the lullaby her own mother had once whispered beneath the full moon, and within minutes both children drifted peacefully back to sleep. While fastening the blanket around them once more, her eyes caught something unusual pressed into the damp earth nearby. Fresh horseshoe prints. Not one horse. 3. They had crossed the hunter's trail only hours earlier. Her heartbeat quickened. In her first life no riders had ever traveled this forgotten route. The timeline had already begun to change. She carefully covered her own footprints with fallen branches before leaving the stream behind, moving deeper into thicker woods where moonlight barely reached the ground. Every unfamiliar sound sharpened her senses, but she refused to surrender to panic. She had not been given another chance simply to relive old fears. She had been given the opportunity to make different choices. Far beyond the forest, inside the towering walls of Ashmore Castle, King Alaric Ashthorn stood alone upon the eastern balcony overlooking the endless mountains. Sleep had abandoned him for nearly 2 weeks. Every night the same dream returned with haunting clarity. He never saw the woman's face. He only remembered desperate hands reaching through falling snow and the heartbreaking sound of infants crying somewhere beyond his grasp. Each morning he awoke carrying a grief that made no sense, as though he had forgotten someone whose name had once meant everything. His advisors blamed the dreams upon exhaustion after months of border negotiations, yet the strange emptiness inside him refused to fade. As twilight settled across the kingdom, his wolf stirred uneasily beneath his calm expression. Then it happened again. A faint scent drifted across the evening breeze, impossibly distant yet unmistakably familiar. Warm cedar. Wild lavender. And something else. Milk meant for newborn children. His wolf surged with sudden urgency unlike anything he had ever experienced before. Find her, the ancient instinct whispered with absolute certainty. Find them before it is too late. Alaric turned toward the captain of the royal guard standing quietly behind him. His voice remained steady, but something deeper echoed beneath every word. Send trusted scouts into the western forests before sunrise. I do not know who they are or why this feeling refuses to leave me, but someone out there needs to be found. Miles away, hidden beneath the sheltering branches, Isla suddenly looked over her shoulder. She could not explain why, but for a single heartbeat she felt as though invisible eyes had finally begun searching for her once again. The first light of dawn slipped through the towering evergreens as Isla awakened to an uneasy silence that felt heavier than the darkness itself. Her twins still rested peacefully against her, their tiny faces calm enough to convince any stranger that the world beyond the forest did not exist. Yet her own heartbeat refused to settle. She had learned that danger rarely announced itself with loud footsteps. More often, it arrived wrapped in quiet moments that seemed almost ordinary. She carefully stepped away from the shelter of the old oak and followed the winding hunter's trail farther into the mountains, choosing rocky ground whenever possible so her footprints would disappear among scattered stones. Every decision she made was guided by memories no one else carried. She remembered where streams became too shallow to hide tracks. She remembered which valleys echoed with the voices of travelers. Most importantly, she remembered every mistake that had once led sorrow directly to her door. Hours passed before she noticed something impossible. The forest around her had begun to change. Wildflowers that normally bloomed weeks later already covered the meadow ahead, their silver petals glowing beneath the morning sun. In her first life, this field had been empty during the same season. Isla slowed her steps, confusion replacing fear. The timeline was no longer repeating itself exactly. It was shifting in quiet, unpredictable ways. One of the twins suddenly opened his bright gray eyes and reached toward the flowers. As Isla gently lowered herself onto the grass, the infant's tiny fingers brushed a single blossom. At once the flower released a soft shimmer, as though moonlight had briefly awakened inside its petals. Isla stared in disbelief before quickly pulling her hand away. That had never happened before. Her mother's pendant resting against her neck grew faintly warm, and an old memory surfaced from long ago. As a little girl she had once asked why their family protected the silver pendant so carefully. Her mother had smiled with unusual sadness and answered, "Some bloodlines carry promises. Older than kingdoms. When the moon decides the time has come, even flowers remember." Isla had never understood those words until now. Before she could gather her thoughts, a quiet rustling came from the edge of the meadow. She immediately lifted both children and slipped behind a cluster of tall boulders, holding her breath. An elderly woman wearing a weathered traveling cloak slowly emerged between the trees, guiding a small gray donkey loaded with baskets of herbs. The stranger paused in the center of the meadow and looked directly toward the flowers that had shimmered only moments earlier. Her expression grew thoughtful rather than alarmed. After several long seconds she continued walking without turning toward Isla's hiding place. Only after the sound of gentle hoofsteps faded into the distance did Isla dare to breathe again. She realized something else had changed. In her previous life she had never met an herbalist on this trail because she had never traveled here at all. Every altered decision was creating entirely new encounters. Far away inside Ashmore Castle, King Alaric stood before an enormous map spread across the council chamber table while his most trusted captains reported that no villages had seen any unusual travelers. He listened patiently, yet his attention drifted toward the open window where a cool breeze carried the scent of pine from the western forests. Without warning his wolf pressed forward with startling intensity, filling him with a certainty that defied reason. "She is alive." The thought echoed through his mind so clearly that he almost spoke it aloud. Not she might be. Not someone. She is alive. Alaric frowned at the strange conviction. He had no name. No face. Only the lingering sorrow from dreams that refused to release him. His captain quietly asked whether the search should continue. The king answered without hesitation. Expand the search beyond the villages. Follow forgotten trails, abandoned shrines, and mountain passes. I believe the person we seek is avoiding every road others would choose. As the scouts prepared to ride west, Lady Seraphine Blackwell observed the meeting from a nearby gallery hidden behind carved stone columns. She concealed her surprise behind a graceful smile, but unease settled deep within her thoughts. The king had never shown interest in the western forests before. Something had changed, and whatever had awakened his instincts threatened plans she had believed were still safely buried in the future. The mountain air grew cooler as Isla climbed toward higher ground, where towering cliffs shielded narrow valleys from the eyes of travelers below. She had chosen this route because no one in her first life had ever spoken of it. Every unfamiliar path carried uncertainty, yet uncertainty now felt safer than repeating a future she already knew. Her twins rested quietly against her chest for most of the morning, waking only long enough to drink and return to peaceful sleep. Their calmness should have eased her heart, but instead it deepened the strange feeling that destiny itself was watching them. Near midday she discovered an abandoned shepherd's cabin nestled beside a spring so clear that smooth stones shimmered beneath the water. The roof sagged with age, yet the walls still offered shelter from the mountain wind. Isla decided they would remain only until sunset. She carefully laid a wool blanket upon the wooden floor and settled the twins side by side. As she prepared a small pouch of dried herbs to brew into warm tea, an unexpected glow caught her attention. Tiny silver lines were beginning to appear beneath the delicate skin of one baby's wrist. At first she believed sunlight had reflected across the room, but the faint pattern remained. Within moments an identical mark slowly emerged upon the other twin. Isla's breath caught in her throat. Crescent shapes intertwined with elegant branches, forming symbols unlike any ordinary birthmark. In her previous life she had never seen them. Her children had been taken long before anything like this could happen. She instinctively reached for the silver pendant hanging around her neck. The metal had become noticeably warm again, almost as though it recognized the mysterious markings. Another forgotten memory surfaced from childhood. She remembered her grandmother lowering her voice whenever stories turned toward the oldest rulers of Ashmore. The first royal blood was never proven by a crown, the elderly woman had once whispered. It answered only to the moon. When the true line awakens, the signs appear where no hand can place them. Isla had laughed then, believing it was nothing more than an old legend meant to comfort children. Now that legend rested upon the tiny wrists of her sleeping sons. Before she could gather another thought, a gentle knock echoed against the weathered cabin door. Fear instantly tightened every muscle in her body. She had left no obvious trail. No one should have known she was there. Holding one child securely while lifting the other into her arms, she approached the small window instead of opening the door. Standing outside was the elderly herbalist she had seen crossing the meadow the day before. The woman remained several feet from the entrance with both hands visible, carrying only a basket filled with dried lavender and bundles of sage. I know you are frightened, the old woman said softly without moving closer. If I wished to betray you, I would not have come alone. Isla remained silent. Every lesson from her previous life urged her to trust no one. The herbalist nodded as though she understood the hesitation. Your children carry a light that even sleeping mountains can feel. I have watched these forests for many years, and I have never seen the flowers awaken as they did yesterday. Isla felt her heartbeat quicken. She had told no one about the shimmering blossoms. Who are you? She finally asked through the closed door. The woman smiled with quiet sadness. Some call me Miriam. Long ago I served the moon sanctuary before the kingdom forgot it ever existed. The name stirred no memory, yet something about the woman's calm voice eased a small part of Isla's fear. Miriam carefully placed the basket beside the door and stepped backward. There is a guardian traveling these mountains. He studies ancient signs that most people no longer believe are real. If he discovers your children before you understand what they are becoming, others will follow him. Leave this cabin before sunset. Isla waited until the old woman disappeared among the pines before opening the door. Inside the basket she found fresh bread, healing herbs, and a folded piece of worn parchment. Upon it was a simple map leading toward an isolated valley hidden beyond the northern ridge. At the bottom, written in careful handwriting, were 7 words that sent a chill through her heart. The moon has awakened before the kingdom was ready. Before the last glow of sunset slipped behind the mountains, Isla folded the worn map and tucked it safely inside her cloak. Every instinct urged her to keep moving. She no longer believed that safety could be found by staying in one place, no matter how hidden it seemed. The abandoned cabin had offered a brief moment of peace, but peace was becoming a luxury she could not afford. She secured the twins against her chest once more and quietly followed the narrow route marked on Miriam's parchment. The trail climbed steadily through towering pines before bending toward a rocky ridge where cool mist drifted across the path. As darkness settled over the forest, the moon rose full and bright above the peaks, bathing the valley below in silver light. Isla paused only long enough to let the twins rest. They had barely stirred throughout the journey, yet tonight something felt different. Both children opened their eyes at the same moment and gazed toward the moon with unusual stillness. The faint silver markings upon their wrists shimmered once again, brighter than before but gentle enough to resemble moonlight dancing across water. Isla instinctively covered the tiny marks beneath the sleeves of their blankets. Fear whispered that if strangers could see them, questions would follow. Questions had destroyed lives before. She would not allow history to repeat itself. Far away in Ashmore Castle, Lady Seraphine Blackwell stood inside her private chambers, staring into the flames of a marble fireplace as an elderly messenger quietly delivered fresh reports from the western frontier. No villages had discovered the missing Omega. No merchant had claimed to shelter a young mother with newborn children. Every familiar path remained empty. Instead of relief, Seraphine felt growing unease. She remembered every step that fate was supposed to follow. Certain events had always unfolded with perfect certainty, yet now invisible pieces no longer fit together. Someone had altered the pattern. She dismissed the messenger and walked toward the tall windows overlooking the royal gardens. For reasons she could not explain, she found herself watching the western horizon long after the sun had disappeared. Meanwhile, King Alaric Ashthorne remained awake inside the royal library, surrounded by ancient records that few scholars had touched in generations. Sleep had become impossible. The dreams returned every night with greater clarity. This evening he no longer heard only children crying through falling snow. He also heard a woman's voice repeating the same quiet promise again and again. "I will find another way. I will protect them." The words echoed inside him long after he opened his eyes. Drawn by an instinct he could neither explain nor silence, Alaric searched through forgotten histories until one weathered volume caught his attention. It described an ancient order known as the Moon Sanctuary, whose guardians once watched over children carrying rare royal blessings that awakened beneath the full moon. Most historians dismissed the account as legend, yet one sentence refused to leave his thoughts. When the heirs of the first moonline awaken, the kingdom itself begins to remember what was forgotten. Alaric slowly closed the book. Something deep within him stirred with painful certainty. Whatever he had been searching for was no longer simply a person. It was connected to a truth buried long before his reign began. Back in the mountains, Isla finally reached the highest ridge marked upon Miriam's map. Beyond it stretched a secluded valley untouched by villages or trade roads. A crystal lake reflected the moon like polished silver, while ancient stone pillars circled its shore as though protecting secrets older than memory itself. Relief briefly softened her weary expression. Perhaps this hidden place could offer the twins the time they needed. As she stepped into the valley, a gentle breeze carried the scent of cedar through the quiet night. Without warning, both infants reached tiny hands toward the same distant hill overlooking the lake. At that exact moment, a solitary figure wrapped in a dark traveling cloak appeared upon the ridge above. The stranger did not move closer or call out. He simply stood beneath the moon, studying the valley with calm patience before slowly raising an old wooden staff crowned by a silver crescent that gleamed in the night. The cloaked traveler remained motionless upon the ridge, allowing the silence between them to settle like falling snow. Isla instinctively stepped backward, tightening her hold on the twins as every memory from her previous life urged her to flee before another stranger could change her fate. Yet the old man made no attempt to approach. Instead, he slowly lowered the crescent-topped staff until its base rested against the earth. The silver emblem reflected the moonlight, and to Isla's surprise, the pendant around her neck answered with a gentle warmth. Both infants turned toward the traveler and smiled with the innocent curiosity only children possessed. Their tiny silver markings glowed faintly beneath the fabric covering their wrists, then gradually faded once more. "You do not need to fear me," the old man said, his voice carrying calmly across the quiet valley. "If I intended to reveal your hiding place, others would already be here." Isla remained silent. She had trusted kind words once before, and the cost of that mistake had haunted 2 lifetimes. The traveler seemed to understand her hesitation. "My name is Gideon," he continued. "I was the last keeper of the Moon Sanctuary after it was abandoned by those who chose power over remembrance." That name stirred nothing within her memory, yet the title did. Miriam had spoken of the sanctuary as though it had truly existed. Isla glanced toward the ancient stone pillars surrounding the lake. They no longer appeared abandoned. Under the full moon, faint silver symbols shimmered across their weathered surfaces, as though the valley itself had quietly awakened after centuries of waiting. Gideon slowly descended the hillside, stopping several yards away so he would not invade her sense of safety. He looked first at the twins, then at the pendant resting against Isla's cloak. His expression softened with unmistakable recognition. The pendant belonged to the Hartwell bloodline, he said gently. Its guardians were entrusted with protecting children born beneath the first moon. Isla's heartbeat quickened. She had believed the pendant was only a treasured family keepsake. My grandmother never told me any of this, she whispered. Gideon nodded. She could not. Many truths were hidden because the kingdom feared what they might awaken. Before Isla could ask another question, one of the babies reached a tiny hand toward the nearest stone pillar. A soft beam of silver light flowed across the ancient carving, revealing a crescent surrounded by two smaller stars. Gideon watched quietly, his eyes filled not with surprise but with quiet relief. The valley has accepted them, he murmured. That has not happened for generations. Miles away, King Alaric stood upon the western tower as another restless night settled over Ashmore. His wolf had refused every command to remain calm. The invisible pull had grown stronger with every passing hour, no longer pointing merely toward the western forests but toward a single place hidden somewhere beyond them. Without understanding why, Alaric ordered his horse prepared before dawn. He ignored every advisor who urged him to postpone the journey until a larger escort could assemble. This search had become deeply personal, though he still could not explain the reason. At the same moment, Lady Seraphine received an unexpected visitor inside her private chambers. A royal scholar bowed respectfully before presenting a collection of forgotten records recently removed from the castle library at the king's request. As she casually examined the brittle pages, one illustration caused her smile to disappear. It depicted two infants bearing identical silver markings beneath a royal crescent. A note beneath the drawing read, "The awakening of twin heirs restores the forgotten covenant." Seraphine slowly closed the book, masking the unease rising within her. The future she believed she understood was slipping beyond her control. Back in the hidden valley, Gideon looked toward the eastern horizon where the first hint of dawn would arrive in only a few hours. His peaceful expression turned unexpectedly serious. "You reached this sanctuary before those hunting destiny found you," he said quietly. "But now the valley has awakened, and its light cannot remain hidden forever. Others will begin to feel it, even if they do not yet understand what they are seeking." As if answering his warning, a warm breeze crossed the lake, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of cedar and wild lavender. Isla felt it at the exact moment King Alaric, many miles away, suddenly lifted his head beneath the same moon, certain for the first time that whoever haunted his dreams was no longer beyond his reach. Morning arrived quietly over the hidden valley, yet Isla could not shake the feeling that time itself had begun moving faster. The peaceful refuge Gideon had revealed no longer felt untouched. The lake reflected the pale blue sky with perfect stillness, while the ancient stone pillars continued to glow with faint silver lines that disappeared whenever she looked directly at them. It was as though the valley had awakened to watch over her children, but in doing so had also announced their existence to forces beyond the mountains. Gideon spent the early hours gathering herbs that grew only along the lake's edge. When he returned, he handed Isla a small pouch filled with fragrant leaves. "Brew these when the moon rises," he said. "They will calm the children's awakening until they are strong enough to carry their gift without fear." Isla accepted the herbs gratefully before looking down at the twins. The silver markings had faded again beneath their sleeves, leaving only smooth skin behind. If she had not witnessed the light with her own eyes, she might have believed she had imagined everything. Yet her pendant remained warm against her heart, refusing to let doubt erase what she already knew. As the morning passed, Gideon invited Isla to walk beside the oldest stone circle while the babies rested nearby. The carvings upon the weathered pillars slowly became clearer beneath the sunlight. They showed generations of guardians standing beside children marked with silver crescents. Near the final pillar, Isla stopped abruptly. One carving looked strangely familiar. It depicted a king kneeling before a woman holding two small children, not in defeat, but in solemn promise. She reached out and gently touched the ancient image. The instant her fingers met the stone, another memory burst into her mind. She saw herself running through falling snow in her previous life, desperately calling for help while clutching empty blankets against her chest. Then the memory shifted. For the first time, she saw something she had never witnessed before. Far beyond the frozen river, King Alaric had been racing toward her with a small company of loyal guards. His face was filled with desperate determination rather than indifference. Before he could reach the forest, Lady Seraphine appeared before him with forged royal documents claiming that enemies had attacked the eastern border. Bound by duty to protect the kingdom, he turned away only after ordering trusted soldiers to continue searching the woods. Isla gasped as the vision ended. Everything she had believed for 2 lifetimes suddenly began to fracture. He had not abandoned her willingly. He had been deceived before he ever reached the river. Tears quietly filled her eyes, not because the pain had disappeared, but because it had changed shape. Regret no longer belonged to one heart alone. Hundreds of miles away, King Alaric urged his horse through winding mountain trails, refusing every suggestion that they should stop to rest. Each passing mile strengthened the invisible pull within him until his wolf no longer growled with restless uncertainty. Instead it carried quiet hope, a feeling so unfamiliar that Alaric scarcely recognized it. Shortly after noon, one of his scouts returned with unexpected news. An elderly herbalist matching Miriam's description had been seen traveling north several days earlier. She had spoken only one sentence before disappearing into the forest. The valley remembers before the kingdom does. Alaric repeated the words softly. Something about them unlocked another fragment of his recurring dream. This time he no longer heard only children crying. He heard a woman whisper his name with heartbreaking trust before everything dissolved into silence. At that exact moment, far inside Ashmore Castle, Lady Seraphine received confirmation that the king had personally ridden toward the western mountains. She calmly dismissed every servant from her chambers before opening a hidden chest containing sealed letters and an old silver seal that had never been meant for public eyes. She stared at the crest for a long moment, then quietly whispered, "If the past awakens, the truth will awaken with it." Back at the sanctuary, Gideon looked toward Isla with knowing eyes. "Memories reveal themselves only when the heart is ready to carry them," he said gently. "What you remembered today is only the beginning. Before this journey ends, both you and the king must discover who truly separated your paths, because the greatest lie was never that you were unloved. The greatest lie was convincing both of you that the other had chosen to walk away." The afternoon sun slowly crossed the hidden valley as though even time wished to linger where forgotten promises had begun to awaken. Isla remained beside the ancient stone circle, unable to free herself from the memory that had changed everything. For 2 lifetimes she had carried the unbearable belief that King Alaric had abandoned her when she needed him most. Now that certainty had dissolved into painful uncertainty. If he had truly tried to reach her, then someone else had carefully guided both of their lives toward heartbreak. She looked down at her sleeping twins, gently brushing a loose strand of hair from one tiny forehead. They deserved a future built upon truth instead of fear. Gideon approached quietly, carrying an old wooden chest that appeared almost as ancient as the sanctuary itself. He carefully placed it upon the stone altar in the center of the circle before lifting the weathered lid. Inside rested faded scrolls, silver medallions, and a crystal no larger than the palm of a hand. The crystal shimmered softly beneath the afternoon light. The sanctuary kept more than history, Gideon explained. It preserved memories entrusted by those who wished the truth to survive even when voices were silenced. Isla watched as he rested the crystal upon the altar. Almost immediately, the pendant around her neck answered with a familiar warmth. The crystal brightened until delicate images appeared inside its surface like reflections upon still water. She saw an elegant council chamber she had never visited. Young guardians stood before the former king, pleading for the moon sanctuary to remain protected. Among them stood a woman wearing the same pendant Isla now carried. Then another figure entered the vision. Lady Seraphine Blackwell. She looked younger, but the calm confidence in her eyes had not changed. She spoke quietly with several royal advisors before placing sealed documents upon the council table. Moments later the vision shifted again. The sanctuary was abandoned. The guardians scattered. The records were locked away. The crystal dimmed, leaving only silence behind. Isla slowly lifted her eyes toward Gideon. She planned this long before my children were born, she whispered. Gideon gave a solemn nod. Some people fear power. Others fear the truth that limits their power. They are rarely the same thing. Far beyond the valley, King Alaric and his small company reached the edge of the western mountains shortly before sunset. His captain suggested making camp until daylight, but the strange pull guiding him had become almost impossible to ignore. Without warning, his horse stopped beside an abandoned shrine overgrown with vines. Alaric dismounted and stepped toward the weathered stones. At the center lay a broken carving of the same silver crescent he had discovered in the castle library. As his fingers brushed the ancient symbol, another fragment of memory flashed before him. He remembered placing a royal seal upon an order protecting the moon sanctuary years earlier. Yet immediately afterward he remembered signing a second decree declaring the sanctuary permanently closed. Confusion filled him. He had no recollection of why the second order had ever existed. Someone had manipulated the records surrounding his own reign. Back inside Ashmore Castle, Seraphine received word that the king's search had reached the western mountains. For the first time in many years, the composed noblewoman allowed worry to touch her expression. She opened a hidden compartment beneath her writing desk and removed one final sealed letter bearing the forgotten crest of the old royal council. She stared at it for a long moment before quietly placing it into the fire. The parchment curled into ash, but one sentence escaped her lips before the flames consumed every word. No secret stays buried once the true heirs awaken. At the sanctuary, the twins suddenly opened their eyes together. The silver markings upon their wrists returned brighter than ever before, and every ancient pillar surrounding the lake answered with a gentle glow. Soft ripples spread across the water although no wind disturbed its surface. Then, from the opposite shore, footsteps echoed through the quiet evening. Isla instinctively gathered the children into her arms and turned toward the sound. Emerging between the silver-lit stones was a lone traveler dressed in a dark royal cloak dusted by the long mountain road. Neither of them spoke, yet the moment their eyes met across the lake, the invisible bond both had carried through dreams, memories, and 2 lifetimes awakened with unmistakable certainty. King Alaric Ashthorne stopped at the edge of the silver lake as though every mile of his journey had been leading to this single moment. The evening breeze carried the familiar scent that had followed him through countless restless nights, and for the first time his dreams stood before him as living truth instead of fading shadows. Isla Hartwell held the twins close, her heart torn between memories of unbearable loss and the quiet realization that the man across the water had never truly stopped searching. Neither moved. The ancient valley seemed to breathe with them, every stone pillar glowing softly beneath the rising moon. Then the twins reached tiny hands toward Alaric, their silver markings shining brighter than ever before. The light spread across the sanctuary, flowing from one pillar to another until the entire circle shimmered with gentle radiance. Gideon stepped forward and bowed his head. The sanctuary recognizes the first moon heirs, he said quietly. There is no longer any room for doubt. Alaric slowly crossed the remaining distance without taking his eyes from Isla. When he finally stood before her, he did not reach for the children or demand answers. Instead, he lowered himself onto one knee. I do not remember every moment that brought us here, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion filling it, but I know with complete certainty that I have failed to protect what should have mattered most. I cannot ask you to forget your pain. I can only promise that I will spend every day proving that I have learned from it. Isla searched his face, expecting the pride of a king. Instead she found only honesty and regret. The memories she had recovered beside the ancient pillar returned once more. She now knew he had tried to reach her. She also knew that forgiveness could never be given simply because the truth had changed. It had to be earned through choices made today, not yesterday. Before she could answer, several royal scouts entered the valley, stopping in astonishment as the glowing sanctuary reflected across the lake. Their captain immediately bowed to both Isla and the king. Your Majesty, he said, we discovered hidden records inside the abandoned Eastern archives. They confirmed that the order closing the moon sanctuary was forged by members of the old royal council. Lady Seraphine's private seal appears throughout the documents. Alaric accepted the records in silence before looking toward Gideon, who slowly revealed the sanctuary crystal. As its light touched the recovered documents, the final fragments of truth unfolded before everyone present. The false decrees. The altered reports. The deliberate separation of two people who had been manipulated into believing the other had abandoned them. Nothing more was needed. The years of misunderstanding collapsed beneath undeniable evidence. Several days later, the great hall of Ashmore Castle filled with nobles, elders, village representatives, and citizens from every corner of the kingdom. Alaric stood before them not upon his throne but upon the floor beside Isla. He publicly acknowledged the truth of the forged records, restored the moon sanctuary to its rightful place in the kingdom, and recognized the twins as members of the royal bloodline whose awakening had fulfilled an ancient covenant. He also announced new laws guaranteeing equal protection and fair treatment for every Omega throughout the realm so that fear and silence would never again decide another family's future. Those responsible for the deception were removed from positions of authority and judged according to the kingdom's laws through an open and lawful process. When the ceremony ended, Alaric turned once more to Isla. "The kingdom has heard my words," he said softly. "Now the choice belongs only to you." Isla looked at the peaceful faces of her children before lifting her eyes to meet his. "I came back to this life to protect them," she replied. "I did not return for a crown. I did not return for destiny. If we build a future together, it will be because trust has been rebuilt with patience, kindness, and truth." Alaric nodded without hesitation. "Then that is where our future begins." As the twins laughed beneath the afternoon sunlight, the silver markings upon their wrists faded into gentle warmth, no longer hidden by fear but embraced as a symbol of hope. Across Ashmore, people would remember that the strongest kingdom was never built by power alone. It endured because truth was finally spoken, wrongs were honestly corrected, those who had been overlooked were publicly honored, and love became worthy only after it learned to protect, to listen, and to give another person the freedom to choose their own happiness.